Well, I love my wife. She's incredible, a great mother. The kids are healthy and happy, and of course, there's nothing more important than that. Richard Gere was once everything Hollywood desired: handsome, edgy, sensual, and rebellious. He earned millions with just a smile, captivated audiences in Pretty Woman, and became a timeless sex symbol after a single role in American Gigolo, where he revealed everything to portray a high-end escort. He embodied desire and cool detachment. For over 20 years, Richard Gere wasn't just a star, he was the ideal of masculinity. And then, he disappeared. No more lead roles, no scandals, no farewell message. One day, people simply realized he was gone from Hollywood, gone from America. The most surprising question wasn't just why he left, but whether he walked away with nothing or with something more. For years, Richard Gere owned a significant real estate portfolio across the United States, expansive estates in suburban New York, a grand mansion in Connecticut, and a luxury apartment in Manhattan. Private forests, wine cellars, horse stables, goose houses, artificial streams. He once lived like a modern aristocrat in America. Then, he sold everything. No warning. No detailed explanation. Richard Gere left America, the country where he was born, where Hollywood once idolized him, where he had everything. No one could understand why a man who had reached the height of fame, with over $120 million, would give it all up to start over, somewhere unexpected. He didn't buy a yacht. He didn't start a company. He didn't move to California. He vanished from the entertainment world. So, where is he now? What made him leave? What made him turn his back on stardom? And ultimately, what is he holding on to? What is he quietly protecting that few people know about? And why is it so different from everything you might expect of a Hollywood celebrity? To understand why Richard Gere walked away from America, the spotlight, and millions in property, we have to go back to where it all began. Not Hollywood, but a small town where a quiet boy once believed that music and philosophy could save the world. Richard Gere was born on August 31st, 1949, in a quiet town near Syracuse, New York. His family wasn't wealthy, and they had no connection to the arts. His father sold insurance. His mother was a homemaker. It was a simple home, filled with music, discipline, and humanist values, a place that nurtured a thoughtful, introspective Richard Gere. Always slightly out of step with the crowd, he didn't begin as an actor. In high school, he played the trumpet, practiced diligently, and excelled in gymnastics. In 1967, he received a scholarship to the University of Massachusetts Amherst, majoring in philosophy and theater, an unusual combination that hinted at an unconventional path ahead. After 2 years, he left school, not from frustration, but because he didn't need a diploma to live according to who he truly was. Richard Gere left college and threw himself into small theater productions in Seattle and New York. He auditioned countless times, took nameless supporting roles, and carried the quiet belief that one day, even silence would be heard. In 1975, his first breakthrough came when he played a death row inmate in The Killer's Head, a role performed blindfolded and relying solely on his voice. That very limitation revealed his greatest strength, a presence that came not from his appearance, but from an inner force. From there, he steadily advanced through roles in Looking for Mr. Goodbar, Days of Heaven, and Yanks. But the real opportunity came when John Travolta turned down a daring, provocative role, and it landed in Richard Gere's hands. That was 1980. The film was American Gigolo. From the moment Gere appeared on screen, naked, unapologetic, portraying a high-end escort, he was no longer just a promising actor. He became an icon. An icon of subtle sensuality, of quiet intensity, of the modern man who doesn't need to shout to draw the world's attention. American Gigolo didn't just turn Richard Gere into a global sex symbol. It marked the beginning of a. There was a phase when everything he touched became a phenomenon. 2 years later, he starred in An Officer and a Gentleman, a seemingly straightforward military romance that became a worldwide hit, earning nearly $130 million at the box office and receiving multiple Oscar nominations. Gere became a defining face of 1980s Hollywood. But Richard Gere didn't follow a predictable path. Instead of repeating the perfect gentleman role, he chose Bent, a bold stage play about homosexual victims in Nazi concentration camps. The role earned him the Theatre World Award, but more importantly, it showed that Richard Gere wasn't acting to be liked, he was acting to explore. From there, he took on roles filled with internal conflict and moral tension. In Internal Affairs 1990, he played a corrupt cop. In Primal Fear 1996, he faced off against a manipulative teenage criminal. helping launch Edward Norton into the spotlight. In The Jackal, 1997, he played a former IRA soldier with an Irish accent, opposing Bruce Willis. But if there's one cinematic moment that cemented Richard Gere in the public's memory, it was Pretty Woman, 1990. A film he initially didn't want to do. The script seemed too cheesy and risky. Only after meeting Julia Roberts and sensing their undeniable chemistry did he agree. The result? $463 million in global revenue on a $14 million budget. A pop culture icon was born, and Richard Gere became one of Hollywood's lasting gentlemen. Throughout the 1990s, he consistently found success with films that balanced commercial appeal and substance. Summersby, Runaway Bride, First Night, and Red Corner. His earnings rose steadily from $2 million to $5 million, then to $13 million per film. His artistic peak came in the early 2000s with Chicago, a dark musical in which he played lawyer Billy Flynn. The role earned him a Golden Globe and brought him back into the spotlight, not for his looks, but for his talent, depth, and decades of experience. In total, over 50 films, dozens of memorable roles, and hundreds of millions earned at the box office. Yet surprisingly, Richard Gere was never nominated for an Oscar, despite many believing he deserved one. From Days of Heaven to Arbitrage, where he played a businessman unraveling both ethically and financially. Perhaps that too contributed to his decision to step back, a career that didn't need a golden statue to prove its worth, one that was complete enough to end with dignity at its height. At the peak of his career, Richard Gere earned millions per film, with a net worth that once reached $120 million. But unlike many of his peers who spent lavishly on yachts, jets, or Beverly Hills mansions, he quietly built something different. In New York State, he bought an old inn and transformed it into the Bedford Post Inn, an 8-room boutique hotel surrounded by nature, where guests meditate, practice yoga, and eat fully organic meals. No bar, no loud music, no VIP sections, just silence and mindful breathing. It wasn't a business venture. It was a statement of life. In Tuscany, Italy, where he once spent an entire afternoon walking just to listen to the wind and the sound of wine glasses. Gere partnered with Tenuta Sanfilippo to produce Brunello di Montalcino, one of Italy's most prestigious wines, under the Bedford Post label. These bottles feature deep tannins, a sweet finish, and a trace of solitude. "I can't imagine a meal without wine," he once said, not out of dependence, but because he sees wine as part of a rhythm, a slow and thoughtful sensory rhythm. Now in his 70s, Richard Gere doesn't manage time. He strolls through gardens, plays with his young children, meditates every morning, and regularly joins his wife in environmental, educational, and humanitarian efforts. His life doesn't follow a tight schedule, but it has structure. It's not busy, but always full. And what stands out most is this: he chose to live that way while still at the height of wealth and fame, fully capable of doing 10 more films if he wanted to. That lifestyle isn't loud, but it's that very quiet that makes people stop and see him differently. A man. He refused to become a Hollywood product so he could live as a real human being. When a man chooses to live simply despite having millions of dollars, it's clear it's not because he lacks anything, but because he already has more than enough. For over 3 decades, Richard Gere owned a collection of real estate that any A-list star would envy. The properties he bought, lived in, restored, and eventually left behind all shared one common trait: they weren't just shelters, they were reflections of a life philosophy. In 1987, as his career was rising, Richard Gere bought a property in Pound Ridge, New York, for $1.5 million, not in Beverly Hills or Malibu, but in a quiet town just an hour's drive from Manhattan. It was completely secluded. Over the years, he quietly expanded it, buying adjacent lots, building 5 guest houses, and renovating the 11,600 square foot main home, which had 9 fireplaces, horse stables, ponds, and private riding trails. The entire estate covered more than 50 acres, like a personal nature preserve where he lived in retreat for over 30 years, away from the media, Hollywood, and the noise he once belonged to. Then, in 2022, he sold it. Price: $28 million. It was a steep number, but what surprised the public more was how he left. No statement, no photos, no farewell. Just a quiet listing and a silent transaction. Just months later, he purchased a historic estate in New Canaan, Connecticut, once owned by music legends Paul Simon and Edie Brickell. The 31-acre property included a 6-bedroom, 11-bath main house, a separate 3-bedroom guest house, ancient forest, rock streams, waterfalls, a fish pond, outdoor pool, and woodland trails. A home with classic English charm tucked into the heart of America. But Richard Gere wasn't just planning to live there. He had a vision. He submitted plans to the new Canyon Planning Commission to transform 27 acres into an eco-agricultural farm, growing mushrooms, raising bees, possibly dairy goats, a self-sustaining model where he could live, produce, and raise his children in harmony with the land, nature, and their roots. Then in 2024, just 2 years later, he sold it again. Price: $10.75 million. He virtually broke even. The farm project was canceled. Everything was listed and discreetly transferred. No one knew why. No scandal, no failure, no public explanation. Only one truth. He left the United States, his destination, Spain. Not London, not Provence, but a quiet suburb north of Madrid, Alcobendas. There, Richard Gere purchased an €11 million villa with a private wine cellar, vast garden, horse stables, and a 34-acre property, enough for his 2 young sons to run all afternoon without ever touching a fence. No fountains, no sports cars, no 24/7 security, just wind, trees, Spanish voices, and his wife's family nearby. "My wife gave me 6 years to live in my world," he told Vanity Fair Spain. "Now I think it's time I live in hers." And so, in his 70s, Richard Gere disappeared from the United States, the place where he once rose to the top, where he had everything to begin again in another country, in a home no one can photograph, living a life with no schedule. Even so, he still kept a few places for when he might return, like the apartment in Gramercy Park, New York, which he bought in 2016 for over $2 million, following Jimmy Fallon's advice, or the house in Southampton, initially purchased for $6.5 million and later sold for a remarkable $36 million. Another older apartment where he lived for 2 decades is now rented out for $20,000 a month. Like a corner of memory quietly commercialized. It shows that Richard Gere didn't need to abandon America. He simply chose not to carry it with him. Living spaces are only part of the story. What he chooses to drive, to keep, and to let go also reflects how he lives. In Richard Gere's garage, there are no flashy $1 million supercars, but there is the careful selection of someone who loves classics.